Welcome to this video where I'll show you how to integrate Stripe webhooks within your SvelteKit application. What we're going to do is just whenever a customer purchases something off you, you're going to get a message, a notification from Stripe, and you're going to handle that with your SvelteKit API. In this case here, we will be sending out a PDF of an ebook to the customer, whoever purchased your product. The way we're going to do it is we're going to base this off the Svelte Stripe integration repo that I've also linked in the description. If you want to code along, you can download it. You can obviously also just follow the video to learn generally how to do this. So I'm just going to go here and say I want to git clone all of this code right here. And then I just go into my terminal and I say, git clone, paste that in, and Stripe integration is a fine name for me. So it's just going to download all of that. And you're going to see, if you haven't watched the last video, you're going to see at least that it's a basically skeleton application. It doesn't really do much. I'm just going to open it in Visual Studio Code here and make sure that will have everything installed. So I'm just going to say npmi right here. And one additional thing that you would need is in your environment variable file, we're going to need the Stripe keys, as well as the public frontend URL and the SendGrid API key. And on top of that, I'm just going to very quickly add some VS Code settings here where I'll just change the font size so that you can see a little bit better what I'm doing here. Like that, perfect. Now, in the meantime, our app has installed, so I can just run npm run dev, and you're going to see that it starts up like that, and it just says get lifetime access, and if I click on it, it should bring me to the checkout page and so on and so forth. So what our goal is now is that whenever somebody successfully navigates through that payment flow, we want to receive a message from them. And that's also what I drew up here, right? From Stripe, we want to get the information directly to our backend, just like that. Now for that to happen, we first have to go to our Stripe account, okay? So on my Stripe, I'm just going to go to the dashboard, and then I want to go to developers. This is also the place where you would find the API keys, the ones that I just pasted in here, right? And the SendGrid API key is actually just the one that I'm going to use for sending emails. So again, if you don't want to really do that right now, you don't need to create a SendGrid API key at all. So in here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the webhooks tab right here, and it's going to allow me to add a new endpoint just like that. One thing here is that if I want to test this on a live server, I need to give it a public endpoint URL. So you can also skip this for now because we can also test this locally later. But just to show you how easy this is, I just have vercel open right now, and I can just go on here and say I would like to add a project and then import a Git repository. For that, I do have to push my project to GitHub. So I'm just going to do that real quick. Okay, so I just pushed my code to GitHub, right? So the repository. And I'm just going to click here now on import. Once again, you don't have to do any of that. If you're struggling with GitHub and deploying and all of that, don't worry about it. I just want to show you that all of this directly will also work on when deployed, right? So here, I'm just going to add the environment variables just like that. I will also need to say that this here is going to be my front end URL. I think it's .vercel.app. Just like that, and then I'll deploy. So on Stripe, I can now already use that to say, okay, I want to add this URL as my endpoint URL, right? I know that this is where my app or my SvelteKit app will be hosted, but then I need to tell it what's the endpoint, right? Because I don't want to hit the website directly. This is going to be the front page. Instead, what I want to do is I want to say this should go to API and then purchase confirmation just like that. So when Stripe sends me the information, it will end up at this endpoint right here. And now we can say, we don't just want to send all the events, right? Because right now Stripe, on every event that it registers, it will give us some information. But instead, we're actually only interested when we make a purchase. So for that, we can say here that we want to select an event. And what we're interested in is we want to have a checkout event. So because we're creating a checkout session first, and then we want to know when the checkout session has been completed. And here you see on the right-hand side, we could theoretically also just say in our endpoint handler, whenever the event is something else, we don't want to do it, but we let Stripe do that. So it will only fire whenever somebody has successfully paid, because only in that moment we want to send out the ebook. So I'm just going to say here I want to add that event, and then I want to add the whole endpoint. And let's see on the side, our vercel project has just been deployed, so we can actually check out that page now on production. Perfect. Svelte 5 Stripe webhook. Sorry, Svelte 5 Stripe webhook. And now if I say get lifetime access right here, I could potentially purchase and so on and so forth. We'll do that later live to see whether our webhook and everything actually works. Okay, so that is all done. Our project is deployed. Our webhook has been created just like that. And we see now that we're waiting for events, which is a problem because there's not going to be any event. Our project is right now, still kind of in the testing phase. I'm the only user. We're only going to see an event when I make a purchase. I'm the only customer right now. I'm the only one that could do anything. So what we want to do is we want to simulate those events locally. We don't want to send them to our hosted version of this app somewhere in the cloud, but instead we want to test out our webhook handling locally. So what can we do? We can go back and say we want to go to webhooks, but in this time we're going to create a local listener. And for us to test out locally our Stripe actions or events, we have to use the Stripe CLI, which I already have installed. If you don't, you need to install that. And then I'm just going to say Stripe login to authenticate myself. And then I can forward those webhooks directly to my machine, which is really, really cool. So if we go here, I can do that anywhere in my CLI. So I'm just going to say, I'm going to create a new tab in here though. I'm going to say Stripe login. We'll see that we get some kind of pairing code, which we're going to have to connect to what we're going to be seeing here. Just like that. I also have to add my two-factor authentication code. And then here you see that's the same code. So this is all perfect. So I'm just going to say I'm going to allow access for Stripe CLI. Now here that I'm logged in, what I can now do is I want to listen to specific events. And Stripe here assumes that locally the server runs on 4242, which for us is just not true. So we're going to write this out ourselves. And I prepared this on the side, right? Because I'm not doing this from the top of my head. But what we want to do is we want to say Stripe should listen to any events and forward them to now localhost 5173, right? That's where our SvelteKit application is. And now our endpoint is going to be API purchase confirmation, just like that. And then I can say I want to listen to the events checkout session.completed, just like that. And now we're waiting for any kind of events to happen. So we're again at the same point here where we say, well, there's not going to be any events, right? So Stripe on top of that offers now for us to actually trigger those events. So I can just say Stripe trigger, and the event that we want to trigger is the checkout session.completed event, right? The one that we're listening to. And when I run this, you're going to see Stripe is doing a lot of stuff in the background, but then at the end, they're going to trigger this event. And now we'll see here where we'll listen to those events that we now have a 404. So something was trying to post to API purchase confirmation, but nothing ended up happening because there's a 404. And this is now the first moment we're actually going to write some code because we have to create this endpoint, right? What's happening right now is that Stripe says, okay, I'm going to simulate an event and I'll send you a webhook to your backend. But right now, basically what's happening is we don't have a backend, right? So nothing is being registered. So what we have to do is we just have to go into our Stripe application right here. And we got to say in our routes, in API, we want to create a new folder that is purchase confirmation. And then in here, we want to have a server.ts file just like that. And now in here, just to make sure that everything is working fine, we're going to say we have a function that is going to be asynchronous. And that is post, right? That's the method we want to handle on the server. And we're going to say here, we're going to have a request coming in just like that. This request object here comes from an event. So any API handler or anything that you write here in a server.ts file with this kind of method is going to expect some kind of event right in here. So I'm just going to say off that event, I'm going to take the request object. And then in here, I'm just going to get the request body, right? What is being sent by Stripe in this webhook? And I'm just going to say I'm going to await the request.json and then log out the request body just like that. Now on top of that, and you already see now that it's been typed correctly here, the request is a request object. Now on top of that here, you're going to see I have an error because a post function or a handler has to return something, right? We have to tell we have to give an HTTP request back. So for that, I'm going to say I'm going to return, and then I'll use the JSON function from Svelte.js. Oops. Like that, right? That is a JSON function right here. And inside of this, I can send pretty much anything. But for now, I'm just going to say all good, just like that. Okay. So just to talk again, well, what did we do? We set up a webhook, but then in order for us to be able to test it locally, we're trying to trigger or to send events to our local machine. And now on our local machine, we want to write the code to actually handle those events. So that we've done very barely here by just saying, first of all, if we receive any requests here, we're just going to get the request body and then log it out to see what Stripe is actually sending to us. And now here in the terminal, if you go into the node, right, in your node terminal, you're going to see whatever happens here on the server side in your SvelteKit application. So if I go back to my terminal right here and I trigger again, hopefully now we're not going to see a 404. So we'll once again triggered this with the same command that I was running before. And now you see here we get a 200, which is actually coming back from here. And in our terminal right here, you get all the information that Stripe sends us. And why is that so cool? It's because Stripe tells us all the information of the customer that just bought our product. And we have that all in the request body here. It's quite deeply nested. So usually what you would have to do is either look in the Stripe documentation for this stuff, or actually say, okay, I see the customer details here. I might want to do something with that. And then you go and say, okay, I want to log out what the request body .data, .object, .customer detail, and so on and so forth. Or you could also just go and say, I want to log out the JSON stringified version of this request body, which will give you everything, and then you can inspect it as well. Luckily, you're in a YouTube tutorial though, so the instructor here has just looked up exactly in advance where the data is that we want. Because what we want to do is we want to send out emails to the customer, and we want to also call them by their name, right? So I want to have the name and the email. So here I'm just going to say request body.data.object.customer details.email, and that I'll be saving to a variable called customer email, just like that. And then I'm going to say I have the customer name, and that is exactly the same, except that for the email here, we need the name just like that. And just to make sure that this is working, I'll once again log that out here, the customer email and the customer name. I will not log out the request body anymore because we don't need more. We only have this one product here in our case, and we're going to just send it out depending on what Stripe gives us. And now if I trigger this again, right, I just go into my terminal, I say Stripe trigger checkout session completed. We should see at some point here the customer email and the customer name. Boom. And we know they have bought this product because we're just receiving this request from Stripe, right? They wouldn't fire this if it wasn't a customer just buying it. So what do we have to do now? Well, I want to send out an email, right? And once again, you don't really have to do that. You don't have to follow along this, but I will use my SendGrid API key to send out an email. For that, I do need a package. I need the SendGrid mail package. So it's this one right here. So I'm just going to install that. And what that allows us to do is with a very simple interface to send out emails. And now I'm going to just bring that in here as sgmail. Oops, I think it was already there. Nope. From SendGrid/mail. And then I also want to bring in my SendGrid API key here from my private variables, and then say SendGrid mail dot. And now here I can set the API key, and I'll just plug that in right here. Perfect. Now with this, what I can do is I can now send emails under the name specified in my SendGrid account. And once again, if you want to figure out like how to set up SendGrid and all of that, it's also in my Udemy course where I go through this in a lot more detail. Now in here, I want to create a message to actually send out via SendGrid. So I'm going to say I have a message object, and here I want to say where do I want to send it to. That is going to be the customer email. From where do I want to send it? And here I have to use the email address that I have verified on my SendGrid account. Now, as a subject, I'm just going to say purchase confirmation. Thank you for buying, or something like that. And then I can also give the content of my email as an HTML. And in this case here, I'm just going to copy it over from what I have prepared here. And it's just going to be some simple HTML like that, right? It doesn't really matter what you put in here. The most important thing is that we want to say to them, dear customer name, right? We want to use the information that we received by Stripe just here. Now this message we could already send out, but the main thing is missing, right? Because what we want to do here is we want to actually send out the product, our ebook, our PDF. And for that, we have to also attach some documents right here, or actually one document, which we do by adding an attachments array. And each attachment has to have some content here, and that content has to be in some kind of binary form, right? So we're going to put it in as a base 64 representation of the PDF. But first of all, we need to have the actual PDF, and that's going to be in an S3 bucket, and it's going to be this link right here. So Narify, public, and so on. You have this in the description, obviously. It's just going to look like this. This is what we want to attach to our email. So I'm just going to say here at the beginning that we want to have the URL of our PDF as PDF guide URL. And now as a content, I want to have whatever is stored here as a base 64 string. So for that, what we're going to do is we're going to download this file onto our server by basically just saying we want to fetch the PDF guide URL, just like that. We're going to save that into a response. It's important that you await that because it's going to take a little moment. And then we want to turn it into a buffer. And we can do that by just saying the response. We're going to use the array buffer function on that, which will create a buffer of that file. And from a buffer, you can turn it into a base 64 file just like that. And if you're not familiar with all of this stuff like buffer, base 64, and so on and so forth, it's not super important here. You will encounter it from time to time in different scenarios, especially when you work with files. But here we're just turning something, or basically we're going from download link to something that we can actually send out in our email. And I'll also show you in a second what that actually looks like. But first of all, let's add it to our content right here. We're just going to say this is a base 64, the base 64 PDF we just created. We want to give it a file name. This will just be whatever the customer sees as the attachment. So here, in my case, it's going to be a digital ebook .pdf. And then we also have to tell it what type is it, and this will be a PDF, so application PDF. And then this position, we say it's an attachment just like that. And then now this whole message thing is something we can pass into SendGrid to just send something out here. So I can just say SendGrid mail.send, and then I'll plug in the message just like that. I have to wait it because it's going to take a little moment. And I will also add, just so that you see this here, a console log for the base 64 PDF, just like that. Now the thing here is that our customer email will come back as something random from Stripe, right? Because we're right now just triggering events. So what I'm going to do first of all here is just say that the customer email will be my email so that we actually see this document coming in. And then later when we actually do it on our production server, you can see how it works when the data is dynamic and coming from Stripe. So what do I want to do? I want to just trigger this event again. I want to check out what my PDF looks like as a base 64, and I hopefully will receive an email from my server. So let's go into my terminal right here. I'll trigger the event another time, just like that. And then in here, hopefully, boom. That's what the PDF looks like as a base 64 string. So just a long array of characters. And then on the side, I'm already receiving this email right here, right? It says, Dear Jenny Rosen. That's what Stripe gives us as a customer name, as a mock customer name. We see our HTML being rendered right here. And then you have the PDF right here, right? So on customer purchase, we're now able to send out documents just like that. And now what I'm going to do on top of that is I'm going to put the customer email back in here. I will save everything that I've done right here and deploy it to vercel. So here I'm just going to say add webhook handling and push that. Now that should lead to vercel rebuilding our project, and then we can try. Let's just see whether that was triggered. Here we go. And then we can try this out live, because what should happen is that now when I go to our website and I buy for real, well, in the test environment, it should also trigger this whole flow by itself. So let's see when the deployment is done. Boom, here we go. So now I'm just going to visit this site. I'm going to say I want to get lifetime access. I'll put in my email address. I'll put in my Stripe credit card. And then I say I want to pay. This is worked out, so everything here worked. Now our endpoint should be hit, and I should receive an email. And I actually received it twice because I'm still listening to the local event listener, or I'm still having that set up. But here you see it, right? The email came through. All of this works. That's all you have to do. I mean, for sending out emails. Everything else, you can just figure out here you're on your own, right? Here's where you receive the request. The only thing now is that right now we're not verifying this request, right? So Stripe sends out this request right here most of the time, but if there's somebody figuring out, hey, they have their webhook listener on purchase confirmation, we can just send something there with our details and then they'll send us the product. That would be bad, right? We have to find a way to actually verify that. But because this video is already so long, I'm gonna put that into an extra video to show you how to verify this Stripe request. If you have any other questions about Stripe, about Svelte, or anything like that, I'm planning on doing a lot more videos like these. So let me know whatever you want to learn. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next one.